Hi. You know what's hard? When someone looks you in the eyes, says I'm sorry, and for a moment, you believe them. You feel your body relax. Your heart unclench. You let out that breath you didn't know you were holding. Because finally, it feels like they see it. The pain they caused. The way they dismissed you. The way they made you feel small. And for that moment, it's like hope sneaks back in. But then? Nothing changes. The apology fades into the background noise of all the others before it. And their behavior? The thing they said they'd stop doing? It happens again. Sometimes even the next day. You're left questioning yourself. Was I not clear enough? Did I expect too much? Am I being dramatic? So you give them the benefit of the doubt. Again. You give them another chance. Again. You cling to the apology like it's proof things will be different, not because it was different, but because you need it to be. Because the truth is, you don't want to start over. You don't want to go back to the apps. You don't want to explain your favorite movie, your fears, your triggers to someone new. You want this to work. You want the version of them that exists in the apology, not the one who keeps hurting you after it. And that's where we get stuck. Between what someone says, and what they show. Between who they promise to be, and who they keep being. Between our hope, and our reality. Her name is Natalie. And for a long time, she thought she was in a healthy relationship. At least, that's what it looked like from the outside. He was polite. Worked a stable job. Never cheated. Didn't yell. On paper? He seemed like a good man. But inside their home, and inside her heart, something felt off. The disconnection wasn't loud. It was quiet. Subtle. Like a slow leak in a boat that no one notices until you're ankle deep in water and pretending it's fine. The first time she brought it up, it was about something small. He'd made a sarcastic comment in front of her friends that embarrassed her. She pulled him aside later and said, "That really hurt." He sighed. Rolled his eyes. Said, "I was just joking. You're too sensitive." Then, after a pause, added, "But I'm sorry." That was it. No eye contact. No warmth. Just words. Still, she accepted it. Because that's what you're supposed to do, right? Accept the apology. Move on. Don't make it a bigger deal than it needs to be. But it kept happening. Little things. He'd forget things she'd told him were important. Say he was too tired to talk after work. Scroll his phone while she tried to tell him about her day. And each time she brought it up, "I didn't mean to. You know I love you. I said I was sorry." Sometimes he would even get emotional, tell her he's trying, that he never wants to hurt her. He'd hold her hand, look sorry, promise to do better. And she wanted to believe him. So she stayed. Because it wasn't that bad. Because he wasn't cruel. Because maybe she was too sensitive. But deep down, her body knew. It knew when she flinched at his tone. It knew when she hesitated to bring things up. It knew when she cried herself to sleep and told no one. The turning point wasn't dramatic. It was a Tuesday morning. She was making coffee. He walked in, glanced at the dishes still in the sink, and muttered, "Figures. You never finish anything." She froze. He didn't yell. Didn't insult her directly. But something about the tone, the timing, the casual cruelty of it, hit her in a place she couldn't ignore anymore. She didn't say anything. Not right away. She just stood there, holding her mug, and realized. This is not the first time he's made me feel small. This is just the first time I've fully admitted it to myself. That night, she wrote everything down. Every time he dismissed her feelings. Every time he apologized and nothing changed. Every time she blamed herself for things that hurt her. And when she looked at the list, a quiet kind of grief washed over her. Not because of him. Because of how long she'd been shrinking. How long she'd made herself small just to keep the peace. How long she'd confused a quiet home with a safe one. She didn't leave that night. But something in her shifted. She stopped making excuses. Stopped explaining away his behavior to her friends. Stopped gaslighting herself into thinking she was imagining things. And slowly, quietly, she started coming back to herself. She found a therapist. Started journaling. Reconnected with old friends. She began to ask different questions, not why is he like this, but why have I stayed this long? Eventually, she did leave. Not with a slam of the door. No dramatic goodbye. Just a quiet decision. A packed bag. A rented car. And a promise to herself that from now on, apologies without change wouldn't be enough. Because she realized something simple and heartbreaking. He wasn't a bad man. But he wasn't good for her. And being not terrible is not the same as being loving. Natalie's story may seem subtle. There's no betrayal. No shouting. No cheating. Just a slow erosion of her voice. And that's exactly why it's so hard to name. We're used to identifying bad relationships by big red flags, yelling, abuse, infidelity. But what about when someone simply chips away at you over time? What about when someone's behavior technically isn't cruel, but still makes you feel small, dismissed, invisible? That's the thing we don't talk about enough. Emotional neglect doesn't always look like violence. Sometimes, it looks like indifference. It looks like being told you're too sensitive when something hurts. It looks like receiving just enough affection to keep you hoping, but never enough to feel safe. It looks like apologies that patch the moment, but never address the pattern. And when you live inside that long enough, you start to question your own perception. You start thinking, maybe I'm asking for too much. But asking to be listened to? Respected? Considered? That's not too much. That's the baseline. Still, when someone apologizes, it triggers something powerful in us. It offers temporary relief. It tells our nervous system, see? You're not crazy. They do care. And for people who've learned to doubt themselves, that tiny sliver of acknowledgement feels like gold. We take it and run. Even if, deep down, we know nothing's going to change. Why do we do that? Because most of us were taught to value harmony over honesty. To avoid conflict. To give people the benefit of the doubt, even when they've already shown us who they are. And because, at some point, we may have internalized the idea that love is supposed to be uncomfortable. That love requires patience, forgiveness, sacrifice, even when it's one-sided. So we stay. We accept apologies that don't come with growth. We silence our own discomfort because we don't want to be dramatic. We tell ourselves, everyone has flaws, no one's perfect, it could be worse. And yes, those things can be true. But there's a difference between compassion and self-abandonment. There's a difference between giving someone grace and giving them permission to keep hurting you. It's not just about what they say when you're upset. It's about what they do after they say it. Does the same thing keep happening? Do they truly reflect, or just want the discomfort to go away? Do they take accountability, or twist the situation so you end up apologizing for your feelings? That's the moment to pause. Because here's something you deserve to hear. A real apology doesn't just include the words "I'm sorry." It includes awareness, responsibility, curiosity about your experience, effort to do things differently next time. And if that's missing? It doesn't matter how sweet the words sound. It's not healing, it's maintenance. Just enough to keep you quiet until the next time. And often, the people most likely to stay in these kinds of patterns are the ones who are emotionally intelligent, empathetic, kind. Because they want to understand. They want to see the best in others. But sometimes, that desire to understand becomes a trap. You end up overfunctioning. You do the work of repairing both sides. You regulate your emotions, lower your voice, wait for the other person to catch up, and in the meantime, your own needs collect dust. And when your needs finally scream loud enough to be heard, you feel guilty. You think, why can't I just be more chill? Why do I always need more than they can give? But you're not needy. You're just human. You crave connection, respect, presence. That's not a flaw, that's your wiring. And anyone who makes you feel like that's a burden is not your person. Here's what Natalie had to learn, and maybe you do too. You don't have to stay just because they say sorry. You don't have to justify your discomfort. You don't have to keep shrinking your needs to fit inside someone else's limitations. You get to leave the table, not because the food is poisoned, but because you're hungry for something that isn't being served. That's valid. That's brave. And that's the beginning of change. Her name is Megan. And the thing about Megan is, she always had a soft spot for the underdog. You know the type. The fixer. The I see the good in people kind of woman. The one who thought love meant patience, understanding, and baking banana bread for a man who couldn't even reply to a text on time. Megan wasn't naive, not really. She was smart. Funny. She worked in marketing, ran a small Etsy shop on the side, had a rescue dog named Pickle, and could quote The Office from memory. But when it came to men, let's just say her picker was creative. Enter Todd. She met him at a bookstore, yes, really. He was holding a copy of The Subtle Art of Not Giving a FCK*, and joked that it changed his life. She laughed. They talked. He had dimples. It was game over. Their first date lasted 6 hours. He told her she was unlike anyone he'd ever met. Said things like "you just get me" and "I feel safe with you." By week 3, he was already calling her babe. By week 4, he had borrowed her favorite hoodie. By week 5, he forgot her birthday. When she brought it up, gently, he gaslit her with a smile. "Oh no. I didn't forget. I was planning a surprise." Spoiler, there was no surprise. But Megan? She gave him grace. Again. Because he'd had a rough childhood. Because he struggled with vulnerability. Because he was working on himself. She bought the story, even when the chapters stopped making sense. When he didn't text back for days, she assumed he was overwhelmed. When he cancelled plans last minute, she told herself, at least he was honest. When he said he wasn't ready for anything serious but didn't want to lose her, she felt flattered, like maybe she was worth the effort. Except, there was never any effort. Only apologies. So many apologies. "I know I messed up. I'll do better. You deserve more. I'm just scared. I've never felt this way before." And every time, Megan gave him another chance. Because when you've been conditioned to believe love is struggle, consistency feels suspicious, and chaos feels romantic. But the truth always finds a crack to slip through. One evening, Megan found herself sitting in her car, in the parking lot of his apartment, waiting. Again. They had plans. He was late. No texts. No calls. She stared at her own reflection in the rearview mirror and asked the question she had avoided for months. Why am I here? Not why is he doing this, but why am I still choosing it? It wasn't about whether he'd change. It was about why she kept hoping he would. Because if she was honest, she already knew the answer. He wouldn't. Not because he was evil. Not because he was incapable of love. But because he liked the idea of her more than the reality. He liked what she gave him, validation, presence, care, but never had any intention of matching it. And Megan? She was done being a mirror for someone else's potential. That night, she didn't confront him. She didn't send a long message or write a dramatic post. She just drove home. And that, for her, was growth. So what do Natalie and Megan have in common? At first glance, not much. Natalie stayed in a relationship out of guilt and fear. Megan stayed in a pattern of almost love disguised as potential. But underneath the details, there's a deeper thread that connects them. They both confused being chosen with being valued. They both mistook apologies for change. They both gave more than they received, not because they didn't know better, but because they hoped harder. And maybe that sounds familiar. Maybe you've been there too, sitting in silence, waiting for someone to finally see your worth. Holding your breath through inconsistencies, convincing yourself that things might go back to how they were in the beginning. But here's what nobody tells you. People don't change because you believe in them. They change when they choose to. And when someone shows you, not with grand gestures, but through patterns, that they can't meet you where you are, your job isn't to shrink. It's to stand. To pause. To grieve. To recalibrate your definition of what love feels like. Because the thing about emotionally unavailable people is, they often don't mean harm. They don't even always know what they're doing. But intent doesn't erase impact. And the longer you stay in dynamics that drain you, the further you drift from your own center. So maybe this is where we start asking better questions. Not why do they treat me like this? But why do I allow it? Not how can I fix them? But what part of me still thinks I need to? Because here's the quiet truth. Some of us learn to tie love with sacrifice. With endurance. With not rocking the boat. We were praised for being chill, easygoing, low maintenance. And somewhere along the way, we learned that being loved meant being less. Less loud. Less emotional. Less complicated. But real love doesn't ask you to be less. It meets you as you are, in your strength, in your softness, in your full, messy human self. That kind of love is quiet. And steady. And, yes, sometimes even boring. But boring is not bad. Boring is peaceful. Boring is calling when they say they will. Boring is remembering your coffee order and texting back before you spiral. And when your heart has been wired for chaos, boring might just feel like heaven, once you stop calling inconsistency passion. So maybe this is where things begin to change. Not in a loud, cinematic way. But in the soft, deliberate decision to no longer abandon yourself for someone else's comfort. Maybe it starts when you choose peace over potential. Presence over promises. And truth over temporary highs. Because when love is real, you won't have to keep proving you're worthy of it. You'll just know. So what now? How do you actually start to break the cycle, not just once, but for good? You don't need a 5-step plan. You don't need to master your triggers overnight. You don't need to become some version of yourself who never gets hurt again. You just need to start showing up, for you. Here are a few small but powerful shifts to begin with. 1. Stop calling chaos chemistry. If someone makes you feel anxious more than they make you feel safe, that's not love. It's your nervous system reacting to unpredictability. Don't romanticize that feeling. 2. Stop confusing effort with worth. You don't have to earn love by being easy to love. You don't have to audition for affection. 3. Ask better questions. Instead of "do they like me?" ask, "Do I feel safe with them? Do I feel seen? Do I like who I am around them?" 4. Practice micro-honesty. You don't have to spill your soul on a first date. But start being a little more honest with yourself, and others, about what you actually want. Even if your voice shakes. 5. Pay attention to consistency. Anyone can say the right things. Watch what they repeat. Watch how they show up when it's not convenient. 6. Let the silence speak. You don't always need closure. You need clarity. And sometimes, their silence is the answer. 7. Learn to stay with yourself. When you want to chase them, pause. When you want to send that "just checking in" text, take a breath. Sit with your own discomfort instead of outsourcing your worth. Because healing doesn't mean you'll never want to reach again. It just means you'll know when to stop. And if you've ever been told you're too much, too sensitive, too emotional, too high maintenance for wanting basic human connection, let this be your reminder. You're not too much. You're just not with someone who can hold that kind of depth. But you can. You can hold space for your own needs. You can speak up, even when it's awkward. You can walk away, even when it hurts. You can start over, even when you're scared. Because the greatest love of your life won't be the one who finally texts back. It'll be the one who stops waiting for that text, and chooses herself instead. That's where the shift happens. Not when they apologize. Not when they change. But when you do. When you stop choosing people who don't choose you. When you stop calling almost enough. When you realize that real love won't ask you to disappear to keep the peace. It'll ask you to be more of who you are. So if you're still here, still listening, still healing, you're already doing the work. You're already rewriting the story. And no, it won't be easy. There will be days you miss them. Days you doubt. Days you question your own strength. But there will also be days, quiet ones, where you'll feel something unfamiliar. Not excitement. Not adrenaline. But peace. And that peace? That's you. That's your new home. So take a breath. You're not behind. You're not broken. You're just becoming someone who finally knows. You never had to earn love. You just had to stop giving it away to people who couldn't hold it. And I'm so glad you're here.